All right, so this is a quick review of noun clauses. Okay, so we started in class today talking about what noun clauses are. We recognize that they are dependent clauses, that they function as nouns, and these nouns could be people, places, or things, and that they can function as the subject in a sentence, or they can function as an object in a sentence. Okay, so knowing what either of those places are for the noun clauses is important. All right, so let's start by looking at noun clauses that are introduced by question words. And so the question words are words like who, where, what, and how. I think there's a when down here. Yep, and here's a when as well. Okay. So when we look at these sentences, what we see is for A, okay, I'm not sure who he is. Okay, so who he is, that's the noun clause. Ooh, I don't think yellow and purple go together very well, but that's okay. All right, if we look at B, okay, I don't know where he lives. Okay, there's the noun clause. C, I don't know what that means. D, how you do it, sorry, I just ruined that, is your choice. Okay, so the noun clause is at the beginning here. And the last one says, can you tell me when the course starts? Okay, and that's where the noun clause is for that sentence. All right, so if we look at each of these sentences, what we can understand is that in A, B, and C, okay, the noun clause is functioning as the object. And it's the object of the verb in the main clause. Okay, so who he is gives us information about the fact that I'm not sure. Where he lives, sorry, that says he. Where he lives gives us information about what I don't know. Okay? What that means gives us information about I know. And so these are the objects. Okay? In D, not number, but letter D, we have a different structure. Now we have something where we've got a noun clause, and it's not an object, it's the subject. And so it begins the sentence. Okay, so how you do it is like a subject clause. Okay, is your choice. Okay, so we see here that we've got subject. You'd want to use the noun clause as a subject sometimes when you're being a little bit more formal. Oops. So looking at the information down here, the context will tell you if this kind of formality or emphasis is needed or maybe desired, okay, by the writer or by the speaker. So when we start a sentence with a noun clause, it tends to sound a little bit more formal, and you'll see how that works in future examples that we look at, either as part of this video cast or another video cast or in class later on. Okay? But what you need to know is that, for now, that noun clauses can start sentences. Okay? The last one is, can you tell me when the course starts? Okay? All of the other sentences that we have here, they all have time or WH words in them. Okay? So, for example, we have this one. Okay, I'm not sure who, I don't know where, I don't know what that means, how you do it. But these ones all finish with a period. Okay? Nope, nope, nope. Whereas this one finishes with a question mark. Why? Okay. If you said because of can you tell me, then you're right. Okay. Can you tell me is asking for information. Okay. So if the beginning of your sentence is asking for information, then you need to have a question mark at the end. Okay? All these other ones up here, okay, these ones are all reporting information. Okay? They're telling you what you're not sure about. They're telling you about what you don't know. They're telling you about what you know, okay, and how you do it. Okay? So these ones are slightly different. Let's move on to talk about noun clauses that deal with if and whether. Our first example says, I wonder if he will pass this class. Oops, I wonder if I will pass this class. Or we can say, I wonder whether I will pass this class. So if or whether, and both of them are okay. Okay. The next sentence says, she can't remember whether she did her homework, or she can't remember if she did her homework. Whether is all right, and if is all right. Okay. So when we have them in the middle of the sentence, okay, whether and if are interchangeable, okay, which means you can use either one and it doesn't change the meaning. At the bottom here, in our last example, we have whether and if starting the sentence. Whether he came to the meeting before or after the presentation doesn't matter. If he came to the meeting before or after the presentation doesn't matter. In this case, when we're starting the sentence and we have the words, we have the choice between whether and if, okay, we only use whether. Okay? If does not begin a sentence. Okay? So as a subject, only whether is correct. When we talk about whether and if, when we look at what the meaning is of using these words in noun clauses, we're talking about ideas of confirming or refuting information. Let me just write those down. Okay, so that's kind of what we're seeking to do. Okay. Maybe the answer is yes, maybe the answer is no. So if we take a look at A, I wonder whether he understands the issues. Maybe he does, and maybe he doesn't. And maybe he doesn't. Okay. She can't remember if she invited him to the wedding. Maybe she does remember, or maybe she can remember, or maybe she can't remember. Okay, so we're looking to confirm or to refute information that we might have. All right, so we've looked at noun clauses that begin with question words. And we've looked at noun clauses that begin with, oops, this is kind of lagging here. Question words, and we've looked at noun clauses that begin with, yeah, whether and if. You got it. Okay. Now we're going to look at noun clauses that are introduced by that. Okay. And I think these ones are probably the most common types of noun clauses. I don't know, this and question words, I guess, but it's not a popularity contest, so there you are. When we start talking about noun clauses that are introduced by that, we need to separate them out into different categories. Okay, and so here we have group 1, group 2, group 3, and group 4. Okay, and when we look at the kinds of words that are in each of these categories, words like agree, answer, admit, explain, assure, convince, promise, or show, we use these words in ways to, what am I trying to say here? They're communicative in nature. I'm trying to get at this word up here. Okay, the word, oh boy. Sorry, I've just totally lost my train of thought here. Let me try this again. Okay, so these different words appear in different groups because of how they are, how these words are used in grammatically correct sentences. So what happens is each of the groups affects the structure of the sentence. Good grief. I don't know why that was so hard to say. There you are. Sorry about that. Okay. So what we did in class, if you recall, or if you weren't there, this is what we did. I gave you the sentence starters. He agreed, and she explained, and he convinced, and I promised. And I asked you to finish them. Okay. And this is what you came up with. Oops, not on that page. Here's what you came up with. My goodness, what a lot of writing on this page. Hopefully this will be all right. All right. So our first sentence was, she explained that why she was late for class today. Okay. So what we want to do with this sentence is first to identify that here is where our noun clause is. Okay. And now we need to look at the pieces of this noun clause. So if we look at the word that, okay, what's the function of that in this sentence? Okay, and we decided in class that the function of that was to introduce the noun clause. Okay, fair enough. Then we move to the next word, and we have the word why. Okay, what's the function of why? Right, it introduces the noun clause. Okay, so now we have two words, that and why, and they both fulfill the same function. So we need to get rid of one of them. Okay. If we decide to get rid of why, we've got, she explained that she was late for class today. Okay, so she's stating a fact. If we erase the word that, and we say she explained why she was late for class today, the meaning slightly changes. Now we know that she's going to, maybe not shows, let's just change that to, she's going to give a reason. Okay, so whether we choose that or whether we choose why in this sentence, both are okay to use, but you can't use them together. Okay, and that's important. All right, let's move on to number 2. This one started with he agreed. Okay, so we had he agreed that, and then we had a comma in there. Oops. We can meet at the library later. Okay, so we can identify our noun clause here. Okay. Now we've got this word that, got the word that in there, and that's okay, but we're not sure why we have this comma in here. Okay, so let's just take that out. Okay, we don't need the comma there. Commas appear in English after prepositional phrases. Okay, those are the most common places for them. So phrases like at the beginning, in the morning, in June. These are those prepositional phrases where you see commas. Why does it keep wanting to do that? Weird things are happening here. There we go. All right. Or we'll also see commas that are very common in adverb clauses, right? When an adverb clause begins the sentence, then we have the comma. Okay. All right. So otherwise this one is correct, and now this one is correct. All right, number 3. I promised that I would take my son for skating. Okay. In class, we talked about this idea of for plus ing, for plus the gerund used for purpose, is incorrect. Okay, you can't do it. When we want to talk about purpose, we need to use the infinitive form, to skate. And we'll talk about that later in the term when we talk about the infinitive of purpose, which is what this is right here. Okay. And looking at the noun clause, okay, I promised that I would take my son to skate. Okay, or I would take my son skating. We can just eliminate the word for. Okay, and that one's okay now. The last one was kind of interesting. We had, he convinced that it is the only right choice for this situation. Let's get rid of this circle here so we can see what's going on. Yoop. Okay. So he convinced. Okay. Well, the question here is, who did he convince? Did he convince someone else? Or did he convince himself? So it's important here to know who. Okay. And so we added in here, he convinced, well, there were two choices that the class gave. We said, one student said, we can introduce she, and somebody else said we can introduce. He convinced she, and somebody else said he convinced her. Okay. We then decided what? Which one are we going to use, she or her? Okay. If you said her, you are correct. The reason is she is a subject pronoun. Oops. Okay, and what you need here is an object pronoun, right? Okay, so think carefully about the kinds of words that you are using with these noun clauses. Okay, you need to convince someone of something. So he convinced her, okay, and here's our noun clause, that it is the only right choice for this situation. Okay, and now this sentence is correct. We also talked in class of what happens if it's himself that's convinced. Okay, how would that change the grammar of this sentence? Okay, I'm just going to use the space down here to explain that. Okay. If it's himself that's convinced, we need to say he is convinced that it is blah, blah, blah. Okay. And what's happening here is in using the passive, the agent becomes the indirect object. So he is convinced by what? By what he read, by his mother. I don't know. He's convinced by someone, right? And that's usually what the agent tells us. Okay, by someone. And whether or not this information is important or not determines whether or not you include it in the sentence. But the fact remains that is if he is convincing himself, we can change this to passive, okay? And the by someone agent that is often left out of the sentence functions as this object that we see here. Okay, this by someone. Okay. Another easier way to say it was he convinced himself. And the meaning is slightly different. Here he's convinced by someone else or something else. Here he's convincing himself. Okay. But generally what we want to point out here is that when you're using words like convinced, we need to convince someone that blah, blah, blah. Okay? So, lots to think about when you're looking at noun clauses with that. And so let's come back to this chart. Okay? And here it is that we had a look at some other words in each of these groups. Okay? So group 1, agree and answer and assert. Okay? This is what we looked at in terms of formula. He agreed, plus that, plus subject, plus verb. Okay? And it's that is optional. Okay? So for these ones, we can have plus that, plus subject, plus verb, but that is optional. Okay? We often leave it out in speaking, okay, but we keep it in writing. And that's what this says here. It's more common to remove it in speaking, but we keep it in writing. Okay? We're lazy speakers, but writing gives us a visual clue that there's a clause coming. So it's useful to keep it in writing. Okay? Let's move on to B. Okay? She explained to someone that something happened. Okay? So group 2, okay, we use with plus an indirect object. Okay, plus that, plus subject, plus verb. Okay. And here, the indirect object, this is optional. Okay. So in group 1, the word that is optional, and in group 2, the indirect object is optional. Okay? So we can say, she explained that she was late for class. Or we can say, she explained to the teacher that she was late for class. All right, let's keep going. Group 3 are the ones that we were talking about just a few minutes ago. He convinced someone that something happened. Okay, so here we've got he convinced someone. Okay, so we've got an indirect object. Okay, so it's one of these words plus an indirect object, plus subject, plus verb. Whoops, I'm missing the word that. Wait. Oh, getting tired. Now I have to erase the whole thing. Okay, plus the indirect object, plus that, plus subject, plus verb. Okay? And this indirect object, you must have. Okay, we cannot say, he convinced that blah, blah, blah. You have to convince someone that blah, blah, blah. Okay? One of the things I think I forgot to mention up here is, I need my eraser back. There we go. In this one up here, remember that if you're going to use the indirect object here, you have to use this word to. Okay, that's really important. Okay, down here, you must use someone, but there is no to. So we don't say, he convinced to the teacher. Okay, that would be incorrect. Okay, our last category here, we're almost done, is group 4. Okay, and this one is, I promised someone, blah, 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 that, whatever it is you're going to say, that I would come for dinner. Okay, so here we've got the verbs in group 4 plus the indirect object. I'm writing off the screen. Plus the indirect object, plus that, plus subject, plus verb. Sorry, I'm totally off the chalkboard here. Okay, but you see it down here. All right. Again, this, the someone, okay, which is our indirect object, okay, is optional, and there's no to. Okay. So it's probably a good idea to, memorize this little chart. Okay, noun clauses are so common in academic writing. They're also really common in speaking, whether it's formal or informal, and knowing which sort of formula to use in terms of sentence grammar is really useful. Okay, these are really common words that you can use in all kinds of different writing and speaking. Okay? And I think that is the end of noun clauses, at least for now.